So thank you for joining me for yet another webinar. This one is close to my heart in the sense that it is about Saturn, which is my favorite planet and maybe perhaps your favorite planet as well. And maybe not your favorite planet, but maybe at the end of this webinar, you'll understand more deeply why I love Saturn and why it is one of the most important planets for us to pay attention to. Saturn is the master timekeeper. Wherever Saturn is, and this will be every 2.5, 3 years, it's like the hand on the clock is pointing towards and prioritizing that area. One of the other reasons I love Saturn is because Saturn not just talks about the arc of our life and what we are building and learning, but I think even ultimately what we can become. And there's a duality to Saturn. And if you know a little bit about Saturn and astrology, it's that, Saturn has a reputation. Saturn has a reputation for being the quote unquote taskmaster, a hard taskmaster. And this is not to sugarcoat or to sort of veneer over Saturn. And I would never do that. I'm a Scorpio. But it's to hopefully give you a very holistic look at Saturn, certainly a very holistic look at Saturn in Aries, and how Saturn in Aries is an entry point for all of us because Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. So we are all entering into something. We'll just have to see. So as I record this, we are just a few days before Saturn in Aries, and just sort of saying this as a reflection on Saturn in Pisces. And I'm not I'm not going to badmouth a sign, but it just feels like Saturn in Pisces has just been so like dragging along, and that's to be fair, Pisces is just by its nature not um, it's not of this world. So we're going to see a tone shift when Saturn goes from Pisces to Aries, certainly in a few days, if not in a few days, as we get into June and July and August of 2025. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on there we go. So again, this is Saturn in Aries 2025 to 2028. And as I record this, it is May 21st, 2025. Again, my name is Katie Sweetman. This may be your first webinar with me. Thank you so much. Maybe it's not your first webinar with me, but I am an astrologer, and I'm also a consulting astrologer, which means I work with clients. I'm a psychic medium, so I have that other side that I bring to my work. And I created Empowering Astrology in 2010 to show people how astrology and consciousness can help us to live better, more soulful lives, because you hear me say it very frequently in my work, the astrology is 50%. You are the other 50%. Astrology is just a framework. We're going to learn more about this framework, time, Saturn, and what do we do with it? That part, to some degree, we have a role into filling the part that is ours. This is our agenda for tonight. Mostly this is for those that are watching on the replay, but just to give you a sense of the structure, Saturn, we are going to look at astrology and times, and I kind of envisioned this webinar a little bit differently to kind of take a little bit of a different approach. And so we're going to talk about the rooms of your life. And you're probably thinking, what are the rooms of my life? But this idea that your life is a space and what is in this space. We're going to look at Mars and energy, of course, the marquee of why you all are here, Saturn and Aries, the Saturn cycle and the Saturn return. The Saturn return for many of you is going to be a major watershed moment in your life. And then also Neptune and Saturn and Aries. It's like I can't talk about Saturn and Aries without talking a little bit about Neptune, because Neptune is now in Aries for the first time in goodness gracious, in 160 years. I can't go in depth into Neptune, that it's going to be a 5-hour webinar, and I don't know if I have that in me, or you probably don't have that in you, but we'll at least look at some key points for Neptune's influence. And then more importantly, Saturn and the signs in quote unquote rooms. This will all make sense very shortly. So, part one, let's look at astrology in time. So, in the universe, there's order and there is structure. And I wanted to make this point because Saturn, as we will discover increasingly throughout our time together, that Saturn is a planet of structure. And even though we are not dealing with sort of this grand cosmic structure, there's this axiom in astrology: as above, so below, as within, so without. So even though we're talking about Saturn and its role in our day-to-day lives, or even in the sort of the great arc of our life, we are invoking the great order and structure of things. It's a little bit of an esoteric point. And there is a world that we can see, and this is actually a close-up of an eye. And there's a world that we can't see. And I wanted to talk about this duality because Saturn is the world that we can see. It's the physicality, it's the structure. But you can't talk about one without talking about the other because they sort of wrap around each other. And time is an energy that is both invisible and visible. Upon occasion, as an astrologer working with people, I'll get the comment, well, time, it's not real. It's invented or it's a construct. And here is the thing about time is that time, in fact, is real. How do I know time is real? I have a picture of hands. It's not very dramatic, but these are the hands of an older person. You can look at your own hands. The hands are typically showing our age. We could have all the Botox, not that I do, in the world, but our hands really reflect Saturn, and that is time, and that is aging. And so this is where time is visible, but also time invisible because we can't see time, but we can see the sunrise and the sunset. I hope we can see the lunar cycle. We can follow the movements of the stars, and that is a way in which time becomes visible. And the visible world, meaning the world that is around you and me at this moment, the room that you are sitting in, your life, this kind of crazy planet that we're all sitting on, it is the world of manifestation. Another important point because we are dealing with Saturn, and Saturn governs over our manifested world, time, karma, and aging. Everything that is born into the physical plane, meaning our physical world, has its own time. You have your own time. There is a literalness to this. You were born at a certain time. I realize most of you or a few of you might not actually know your birth time for many circumstances, but your life has a time. May that time be long. And your own astrology reflects the time of your life. Now, I mean, unless there is some deep esoteric way of discovering this, the chart doesn't tell me how long your life will be. It just talks about the sort of the space in which time and your life will unfold. But it's to understand that here in the physical world, everything has a time because we are incarnated. Something, even if you create something, it has its own time. Astrology at its most basic level is a symbolic system that measures time. I realize a lot of you are like, just Katie, tell me what my horoscope's going to be. Tell me what's going to happen. I don't know. But astrology, we can never forget that astrology is first a calendar, and that's what it is used for, a way of marking the lunar cycle, marking the movements of the sun, when to plant, when to not plant, when to go to war, when to not go to war. This is what the ancients used astrology for. They didn't use it to create memes or to freak out about Mercury retrograde. I'm being silly for a moment. It's just to sort of appreciate astrology at its most basic function. And astrology also makes visible what is invisible and helps us to plan accordingly. We can see time in the sense that we can see the effects of time, we can see the movements of the planets, the moon, the sun, but this idea of time and our life and the time that we are in, we cannot see. And so astrology gives us a symbolic language to see this time, this idea of as above, so below, and to make plans accordingly. And astrology helps us to see time on a much greater scale. I can look at something called an ephemeris, which maybe many of you don't know what ephemerises are, but the idea is that I can look at something called an ephemeris, and it gives me the position of the planets 500 years from now. I will not be alive 500 years ago from now. I'm pretty sure about that, but we can predict where the planets would be. This is through something called an ephemeris. And this is through astrology where we can see time on bigger arcs of time. So I wanted to talk about this briefly, just because we're talking about Saturn, we're talking about Saturn and Aries. The next 3 years are going to go by very quickly. That's just kind of the way things are these days. But it's not to lose sight of the bigger arcs, the bigger cycles, and even the bigger story of your life. In astrology, Saturn is the master timekeeper. Just envision a clock. That clock has many hands, but the primary hand on the clock is the Saturn hand on the clock. And it really marks the chapters and the hours and the time of our life. Even these rings, this idea, it's probably not a coincidence just in terms of like the holographic universe that Saturn has rings and that we can look at the cross section of a tree and we can see the rings of time with a tree, for example. Saturn marks the seasons and chapters of our lives. Now, Saturn typically accompanies the big moments of our lives. And for some people, that's marriage, that's kids, that's getting the promotion, that's making a big move. But the thing about Saturn is that it is relevant to your own life. So your life, even if it is not quote unquote traditional, it is to live it in a way where Saturn will mark the major moments of your life. And you can go back and you can look at what that is. Saturn also governs over structure. We've talked about time, we've talked about aging, I've talked a little bit about karma. But Saturn is our physical reality and the structures that we build in our physical reality. So I have this beautiful image of New York, my home, my adopted home, and it's a space that really represents the energies of Saturn and power and building things. But that's just a vision, or rather an archetype and a metaphor for your own life. What are you building? What are the structures? What are the things that are going to last? The things that have some permanence? You could argue nothing truly ever lasts. But we are here in a physical reality to build and construct and to make things real. Saturn builds upon the zodiac, the wheel of life, like a stage. It is the marriage of time and space. So this is something that came out of my time of doing 3 laps of the Saturn Masterclass. That is 12 weeks each, 3 times, and each of those classes were about 2 hours. So if you want to take you can still still get the replay. It's 24 hours of content, but if you really want to do a really powerful deep dive into Saturn, the Saturn Masterclass is on the part of the part of my website that talks about webinars and classes. So it was something that I was intuitive or sort of intuitively realizing, but it took the class at least the first time to really see what was happening. I'm personally really into mechanics. Maybe that's the part of me that used to be in IT. The other the other degree that I have is in art, so I sort of have the both sides of myself. But this idea of the mechanics of time and how time builds and how time unfolds. And Saturn, it always felt so connected to the zodiac. And it took the class for me to be able to sort of concretize and articulate that Saturn is time and the zodiac is space. Time and space. We always think about astrology as time, but we can't forget about space. And so the zodiac is always the space in which time unfolds. So if Saturn is the master timekeeper, Saturn is collectively bringing us through different parts of this space over a 2.5 year cycle, sign by sign. That's 30 years in total. So that's, I wanted to say this because we're going to look at the Saturn Aries just from a different vantage point, just to shake things up and to get you maybe to look at your own life differently, your own astrology differently, and to start to look at the space of your astrology, not just the time. And so Saturn in Aries brings us into a new cycle to build and scale. Saturn is the first, sorry, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. So we are all stepping into something new. This is why I was sort of talking a little bit about Saturn and Pisces, because symbolically speaking, Pisces is sleep, it's dreams, it's pregnancy. It reflects something that happens before something comes into being. So things kind of are happening, not happening. Maybe they feel stalled. Maybe you're just tired. I know I'm tired. And the idea is that when something comes symbolically into Aries, we are stepping into a new cycle, a new space, a new part of the zodiac. And this is going to be a cycle that actually will unfold over the next 30 years.